and then I'm going to pray for her, and then you're off, Roberta, to share. So I'm going to read from her bio. So bear with me. It says Roberta is originally from rural Massachusetts. She came to faith at home Bible study at the age of 15 and intended to serve the Lord in social work. And after college graduation, she had the opportunity to serve as an English teacher in Osaka at a Japanese church for the summer. God completely rewired her plans to his plans. Working for a few years at nursing homes and a home for the intellectually challenged adults, she wanted to receive mission training at Columbia International University in South Carolina. Step by step, she prepared to follow the call to be a missionary in Japan, arriving in Japan with team in 1991. She has served at a variety of Japanese churches and also served as international staff at Word of Life Press Ministries for many years. After completing her master's degree at Tokyo Christian Theological Seminary in 2010 with her major research paper concerning how returnees are key to overcoming the 1% Christian statistic in Japan, she arrived back in Japan after a brief home assignment and was actively involved in disaster relief with CRASHJapan as a volunteer coordinator while starting to work with Jcfn in her local church and returnee ministry. Roberta has been an associate staff with Jcfn since 2015 and lives in HigashiKurume City, Tokyo. And then she's going to be sharing about receiving Japanese in Japan. And you've seen in your My account what this talk will be about. So we're recording, great. And let me just pray for you, Roberta, and then we'll jump into this workshop. Let's pray, everybody. Chichi Naru Kami-sama. Lord, we just thank you so much for EC20 Beyond. We just thank you for Roberta. Father, just hearing about her journey and where she is now, and even to this moment now in this call, in this workshop. We just pray, Lord, for her and just for you, Lord, to just continue to bless her ministry and her sharing now as she talks about a very important topic, Lord, about returnees and how to engage with them. So, Father, we just pray for just engaged hearts and minds and just to really think through this topic. And we just thank you for her heart, Lord, to serve the Japanese faithfully for so long. So, Father, bless this time now. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Matt. There's a lot that we can say about receiving returnees, but it's kind of all been turned on its head by the pandemic, but not in a bad way, because we've learned and embraced technology so much better and have had to put a lot of intentional effort in it. There's some things that we can do better now than we could 10 months ago. And a lot of things, a lot of people that come to EC feel called to come to Japan and to follow up returnees. And even people that are working in international student ministry in America really have these very beautiful connections with the students they minister to. Because when you have, generally, I'm going to talk in the North American context, generally when you have a student in America, they can't get a part-time job, and so they're very free to have time to be involved in your various ministries. I think in Canada they can get working holiday visas or something, but basically in America your Japanese students are very dependent upon you, especially if there's very few Japanese in the area, for even their social life in a large way. And Setsu Kuroda, I know her by her old name, Setsu Shimizu, has said that the statistic is that the Japanese are 60% more likely to become Christians outside of Japan. And when you talk to missiology people, they just kind of think that's such an extreme statistic. But having met some returnees, they are very, very open to meeting pastors, going to church, because it's part of their American experience when they visit America. And I know one couple worked for a the husband worked for a large company. And when he was in America, he actually studied the Bible for 2 years with the pastor of the church. But then when he came back, he didn't come to faith, but then when he came back, it's like a switch flipped, and he was back into his Japanese businessman mode, and he's like, that was over there, now I'm back in my culture, and so I just go back to the normal way. So there's a openness that you get to see in outside of Japan that you wouldn't see here because of the different ways that people are either stressed by job or family restrictions. So a lot of people, there's a whole spectrum. A lot of you are dealing with people that are students. Students is an interesting grouping because if they come to faith in the States, generally, they're still young enough that they can say to their parents, I've become a Christian, I've been baptized, and a lot of parents will be like, okay. But there are those who have very traditional parents, or the grandparents have a great influence on them, and what they're able to do when they come back and able to share about their faith is really challenging. Some of you who've been in EC before might remember Hiromi Kakihashi's testimony. She works on staff at Tokyo Baptist, and with every family funeral, she faced a different situation. Like, she thought she had it figured out, and she was, letting her family know she was a Christian, but the challenges she faced were different. Now, it's really, really a blessing that people come and visit their returnees when they come back over here. Now that's kind of, I don't know when that's going to start back up again, because a lot of people working with student ministry groups with either once or twice a year come to Japan to follow up their returnees. And I was talking to Chihiro, who is in the Jcfn office, and we really love these connections that you form with your students because they are really heart-to-heart connections. The challenge is the connection becomes so tight that sometimes people in the States or Canada don't release that person to someone in Japan to follow up. And so even though you love your returnee and you have this really strong connection, you have to release them back to Japan, or else they're always going to be longing to come visit you in America, which is plus minus. It's neither good nor bad. But she and I agreed that if you can release your returnee to Japanese pastors, missionaries that can speak both languages, then you can have a more smoother, we have this phrase in Japanese called baton touch. So you want to be able to have a very smooth baton touch so that the person becomes integrated in their own culture as a Japanese believer. And to be Japanese and to be Christian, some people keep it like as two separate entities, but to be a Japanese Christian, because it would be another entire seminar to talk about Japanese church history, but the history of Christianity in Japan actually is quite strong until about 500 years ago, where the Japanese leaders tried to eradicate Christianity, and that would be a whole different history discussion. But I've done a couple of seminars for the RJC network, and I'm always learning more stuff about Japan. Now, what happens with there's a lot of people that make really great lists. There's one very wonderful person who's made a very good list of churches in Japan. Lists are only good as the personal connection with the people on that list. You can give some returnees, you can give them a name of a church and they'll find their way there. But you can't do that with every returnee, because every returnee comes back and experiences reverse culture shock is completely different. There's no set way. Like if you say, oh, go to this church, they might go, they might not go. But now Chihiro and I were talking, the problem with introducing people to churches is in the Tokyo area, not all of them are meeting on face to face right now. So there's another step of the process because of the current generation we're in. Now, for me, when I first got in contact with returnee ministry, when I was a baby missionary, I was going to a Japanese church, and the first person I met at that church who was English speaking was a lady that had just come back from school in, I think, Portland or something. And so she was back, and her husband was also Japanese, but they had both become Christians in America, and long distance relationship, and they finally got married, and they're very, very much supporters of returnees. Now, getting back to the list, I have this list that this person made. This person put a lot of time and effort into the list. But I've had to go through the list and add Japanese to the list because if you just give somebody information in Romaji, that's why you need us. We need to help you find which churches still exist. Missionaries on the field will know what churches have a good reputation beyond the website. If you just look on the internet, a lot of Japanese churches don't have a very strong internet presence. So that can't really be your standard for picking a church. But one thing that I would encourage is we have this seminar called Church Planters Seminar. And Church Planters Seminar, maybe it'll go online, I don't know what will happen to it, is where a lot of the pastors and the missionaries network together. And that is really key for knowing who that pastor is, whether when you know the people, you know whether you can entrust your returnee to that person. And so that's where EC comes in handy and RJC comes in handy. This is a very good resource if you Google Maps is good, but this is a very good resource if you're looking for a missionary in a specific area. And if you're looking for a missionary in a specific area, you can even look them up by mission group area, and it'll tell you how many years that person has been in Japan. But this is not exhaustive. I know some of my friends with smaller missions, they are not in this book. And I always encourage even people that are ministering overseas to be in this book. I think Don Wright might be in this book, I think. But it's a very good resource. It's a starting point. If you're trying to send a returnee back, some of your best resources are mission agencies, because if you don't have enough Japanese to communicate with a regular Japanese pastor, and you don't know which Japanese pastors speak English, your first step is probably contacting a missions agency. Now, this will be the catch-22, how quickly the mission agency responds to your email. I'm not talking about the US office, I'm talking about the Japan office. And because when someone contacts team and is looking for a church for a returnee, I'm the person they contact. I don't know how I got that role, but I've had that role for a while. And so contacting mission agencies on the field and saying, can you please connect to me with the person who would be able to tell me some places, introduce me to some churches for my returnee. That, in addition to the list I was telling you about, are two ways to look for things. Now, Jcfn has another resource, and I'm sorry, I only have the Japanese in my hand, but this is the Returnees Workbook. Now, this is a workbook that you can use, and if you get both languages, you could have the English copy while they have the Japanese copy. I think most of them are available, I think, by PDF now. If not, we can hook you up. But this is called the Returnees Workbook, and it goes through some basic things because some returnees have zero preparation when they come back. It's like they get saved and they graduate from college, they get saved, they get baptized, and they're on a plane. And so some of them have zero preparation. And this is what EC is trying to work on with the inductive Bible study, is so that each returnee has some foundation built into them. So with sending your returnee back, if your returnee is a believer, there's a lot you can prepare them with. But see, time you don't have the same amount of time with every person coming back, and so you need the resources like the inductive Bible study. The Seekers program also does some inductive Bible study, and seekers are very interesting because some seekers, when they come back to Japan, they continue seeking. Some don't, but they continue seeking. So, and some Japanese returnees are so on fire in their churches in America, and they come back and the pressures of life just really press them down really hard. Right now with Jcfn, we have small groups, but for safety's sake, they've gone online. I'm not sure how well they're doing because a lot of the groups that I'm involved with have gotten really small. So this is a very good resource because it talks to them about culture shock. It talks to them about the culture of the Japanese church. Because if they were in America, probably particularly West Coast California, there'd be huge churches with lots of activities. If they're from small churches with small activities, the jump is not so hard for them. But when they come back, how will the particular Japanese church that you introduce to them receive them? If they've been baptized, I said this a couple years ago at RJC in my culture seminar. If a Japanese person is baptized while they're under your ministry, please send them back to Japan with a certificate of baptism, so that if the Japanese pastor is kind of like going, okay, you're a returnee, you're kind of an outsider, what do I do with you? You have to give them as much street cred as you can with we used to think of these things like 40 years ago, certificates of baptism and all that. But the Japanese church, if they're going to head towards a traditional Japanese church, that would help them. That would be a tool to them. So this is a Jcfn resource. I know some of you have seen it before. And actually, Matt's ministry has some bilingual Bible studies that you can walk somebody through. But if you end up with someone that's going back and you have like zero time, that's where the internet comes in handy. And when you have someone that goes back, they're going to want to tell you, maybe most of them are going to want to tell you that they're doing okay, they're doing fine. Because if you repeatedly ask them, have you found a church yet? Again and again and again, they might start backing off and not telling you what's going on. So you have to be a little bit flexible, like, okay, are you reading your Bible? Because if you put a lot of pressure on them, they will feel guilty that they're failing you as your friend. So you have to just kind of be gentle with them. Now, you have people that go back that have absolutely no pressure from their family, and then you have other people that have very Buddhist families. We have a gentleman that works for our mission. He became a Christian in the States years and years ago, and he came back and he moved to Tokyo, and his parents were actually, because he was the son of the priest, and they were actually sending what we would call a deprogrammer to Tokyo to get him straightened out so that he'd come back and take over the family business, which was a temple. And years later, when his daughters were older, I said to him, oh, wouldn't it be cute if you and your wife had a baby boy? And he got very serious. He says, no, everything would start all over again as far as my family pressuring me to leave my Christian faith. So, but every situation is not the same. And every returnee's attitude towards their family is not the same. There's returnees that have actually chosen to be in an extremely traditional church for the benefit of grandma, because they have a passion for their family and they want their family to become Christians. A lot of people want to send returnees all to international churches, but international churches can be pretty tiring. Hearing the English and the Japanese, depending on the person. So you have to walk this path and pray with them very carefully and put your thinking aside for what would be best to them, and listen to them and hear what they think, where they would fit. Because a lot of people don't like the traditional Japanese church, but the traditional Japanese church still exists, and it's where, for some people, their extended family members would attend that, where they wouldn't attend an international church. So you have to not just blanket statement things. And short-term missions are really good, but here's the key with short-term missions, because I know Ariel's into that. You have to find your long-term people to connect with in Japan, so that when you leave, and some of the short-term missionaries don't speak much Japanese. When you leave, you have either a Japanese Christian to pass them off to, or a Japanese church, or a missionary. It could be any one of the number of different combinations. So you have to go step by step on that. The list that I was telling you about has been really educational for me, that because I started going through it and doing some more research and finding out about those churches by reading the Japanese websites. Now, what's really happened in the past year, as many of you who work with international students remember the immigration policy that almost stayed as permanent, where international students, I think, were going to have to leave the country if their school was online, and that got all rearranged. But international students and the immigration policies might mean that the Japanese students and the Japanese business people aren't coming or aren't staying as long. So when you have a shorter turnaround for somebody that's either a seeker, this is the common Japanese phrase, seeker, or somebody who's a brand new believer, and you don't have the ample time that you would really desire for discipleship, I think we've learned in the past 10 months, you can pull that all online. I know Matt's group is always looking for people to be mentors. And that's how I got connected with Matt's group years ago, is I started mentoring a girl that was studying in Hawaii. She's a Christian, studying in Hawaii. And then she moved back to Japan. But the interesting thing is, even with mentoring people, sometimes you might be part of the process, but you might not be part of the long-term relationship. So sometimes you feel like, well, I don't ever hear from my returnee anymore. And that might be a good thing, because they might have landed well and don't need you because they've gotten adapted to the Japanese church. So, I mean, there's a million different ways. I particularly really have a burden for older returnees. I used to do an English Bible class for wives of some of a company west of me, and they had all lived in the same area of Akron, Ohio for 5 years. They had all been there for 5 years. Probably now their company is not sending people to Akron, Ohio, but the returnee wives, because Jcfn often focuses largely on the 20-something-year-olds, the college age. And that's their strength. That's really, really good. But there are also the older returnees and the business people. and the scholars. The Boston Japanese Church has had whole Japanese families for periods of time that have come to worship at the church. Some of them were Christians. Some of them were just like, well, I'm in America and I'm curious about God. So there's this, it's a spectrum. Immigration policies, this is going to change, you know, even you being able to visit your students now, that's going to change that, and them being able to come back and visit you. Some churches have specific returnee ministries, but I think a strong criteria in looking for a church is, do they have to travel a long way to that church? Because it's not uncommon in Japan when somebody finds a good church, they'll travel an hour to 2 hours to get to that church. I can see Ariel's head bobbing. And they don't think there's anything wrong with that. But my personal opinion is we should encourage them to be as local as possible. But there's different reasons why they don't want to be local sometimes. Maybe sometimes they don't want to be in the traditional church in their area. And there are some of the American cults that have churches that look like Christian churches. And if your returnee doesn't know a little bit of the distinctions between Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, because it says God or Jesus in the name, they might think it's okay. For example, I think one non-Christian man asked me once, he said, well, what's the problem with this group? They asked me about a particular group. And I says, well, Christians, we have the Bible, and that's our focus. This group has the Bible and their own book, and they focus on their own book. And so these are things that Japanese people generally might not know. And so, you know, you don't want to badmouth all the groups that might be there, but you want to be able to show them that the Christians are focused on the Bible and the Word of God. And a lot of complaints that some of my returnee friends have about the traditional church is often I'm trying to think of the English word for it. There's a lot of, oh gosh, I can't get the Japanese out of my head. There's a lot of serving in the church. You're expected to do this if you're a member, you know. And so a lot of times they don't want to become members because they want to grow in their faith and they want to worship the Lord, but they don't want to be tangled into all these other things. And so, you know, praying them through that situation so that they can, in the Japanese culture, be able to say yes and no, and also respect the pastor. So respecting the pastor is pretty important in most of the traditional denominations. So yeah, and you know, we have a thing of older seekers. Older seekers, you know, they kind of stay on the fringe of Christian things, and they like Christians, but I think I taught English to an older seeker for about 5 years, and the problem for her was she had to be responsible to take care of the family altar. And she wasn't to the point where she could separate herself from that. She wanted to believe, but she couldn't separate from that. And if somebody's an eldest son, if they're an eldest son, you know, when they're in America, they're free as a bird. But when they come back to America, Japan, they are the eldest son. And so even if they want to be baptized, it's not such a simple thing. See, I'm tripping over my culture seminar right now. So, and I want to show you some resources. Okay. ISI came up with a whole book about returnees. This is a very good resource. It's from International Students Incorporated. and my former coworker was here with Team Japan for a while, and he wrote it. And it has a lot of stories, very insightful stories, because it gives you a look into, when you look at the stories, you go, oh yeah, my friend that I was working with kind of said a little bit of that. And so it shows you, especially if they're going back to non-Christian families. So this was, ISI came out with that one. Probably available on their website, I would imagine. And then this is one that, this is a visual history of Jcfn. This is about 10 years old. But this is also available in Japanese, but this one's in English. And look at that lovely picture of what we would be doing if we were all together. Isn't that lovely? But this is another one that talks about the stories of people returning. And what's really fun is I know some of the people in here. But and these give you, I believe that these stories give you insights into what your returnee might not be free to tell you about their life, because they're being real open, being out of their country, but there are things that they cannot tell you because, number one, they don't want to disappoint you, and number two, they don't want to face how hard it could be going back to Japan. So this is another resource. I'm a person that's into stories, because when I go share with my supporters, they barely know what a returnee is, but if I tell them some of the situations and how difficult it is for people to stick with their faith, because sometimes you have to go slower, because if you push someone, a returnee that's on their way to head back, if you push them for a decision, it might be not lasting. They might get under the pressures of life and job searching, and within a couple of years just kind of say, oh, that was my American thing. So yeah, as in the American culture, you kind of have to slow down and really, I'm not Pentecostal, but you have to really rely on the Spirit to tell you how hard to push, because I know you want that person to come to faith before they go back to Japan, but you want it to last. You want them to stick with their faith. Another thing that a returnee faces that has become a Christian is sometimes they become a Christian and they want to go into ministry. And that's another whole challenge if they're the only Christian in their family. But even if they're from a Christian family, their parents might be like, what woman is going to marry you if you're a pastor? Because they worry that there won't be the status and the money. And so that's a whole different thing that the Christians face. But it's really exciting to see. I could start naming off people I know that in the EC world that have decided to study to be a pastor or a missionary. And some of them, it's really interesting with returnees. Some of them go to America for seminary, and some of them go study in Japan for seminary. And I'm not sure what the reasoning on that is if maybe they feel they have more freedom outside of Japan, but then maybe the ones that study in Japan are more invested in figuring out how to do it in Japan, depending on what denomination they're connected with. And there's, okay, I'm going to breathe for a second. So, yeah. Okay, so another good resource connected with this. This is the Japan Evangelical Missionary Association. You can be an overseas. No, that was Chinese date tea. I saw that comment down the bottom. This is the Japan Harvest magazine, and I think a lot of the articles are online. And really, really has improved. This is a really good resource. Both of these items also have lists of Japanese ministries too. So for you that are in English, it's a really good resource. This is a pretty good magazine because every time they have a different theme. I've got a pile of them at my desk. Like this one was about missionary education, and this one is challenging issues. I haven't opened it yet. So challenging issues. But these are really good insights to help you have a better understanding of Japan, because you're not Japanese, I'm not Japanese, and you're dealing with people that have had a cultural experience outside of their own culture. So you kind of have to mix it all together and see how you learn. Okay, I'm gonna show you a couple more resources before we start answering questions. Jcfn has a number of really good Bible studies. Oh, I have 2 copies in Japanese here. They have even some stories. It's called Hiro-chan. This is a story of a Japanese girl who came to faith, and now she's serving, I think, with OMF in England. So she's become a missionary now. But then there's basic Bible studies that are bilingual. I mean, there's a lot out there. There's a lot online too. Including getting your student into using YouVersion is pretty amazing too. But they have different, Jcfn has different resources that are usually at the resource table. And they're basic Bible studies. I'm not sure who wrote them all, but they've been around for a while. And the advantage for you in North America is it has English and Japanese. And some of Matt's resources also have English and Japanese. So, the thing with the inductive Bible study this week is getting people to be self-feeding so that when they come back to Japan, if it takes them a while to find a church home, that they can still be in the Word of God and growing. But it still is really important to help them find a local church. So I'm ready to answer some questions. And where are the questions, Matt? Oh, do I got to click over there?
Yeah, I just had to unmute myself. Eric is collecting them. Eric,
Okay.
do you want to read them off?
Okay, he's going to read them off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. First question we have is, I got to pull up myself. It's from Kristen. She asked if the Gemma directory book was available online. I guess a better question is, how can they obtain the books or the booklets that you have shown today?
Some of the booklets, most of the booklets were Jcfn. So go onto the Jcfn website, see if they're there. If not, you can email the Jcfn office next week sometime. Yeah, you can. Some of them were put up there as PDFs recently. So some of them are there. The directory, you'd have to probably contact the Japan Evangelical Missionary Association in Tokyo to get that. Yeah, I've got an email address that I can write down later. The Gemma, because the lady that's the secretary at Gemma, she actually works very closely with the Japan Lausanne movement too. So yeah, I don't know if you have to get a membership to get this. That's where I'd have to default to ATSCO. I get it because I'm in a member mission. But there are some people like Don Wright with RJC who is an overseas member. And so the overseas members, I don't know what their status is as far as how they get into being an overseas member. It lists it in the back here. Maybe I'll take a screenshot of it and put it in either the line or the Facebook group. Dennis has a spare.
Okay. The next question is, you mentioned there was an online mentoring program. What was the name of that program?
Well, it's second level ministry. And if you go to the second level ministry website, there would be links for becoming a mentor, being a mentor, asking for a mentor, because the girl that I was working with a few years ago, she was looking for a mentor. And I had just asked to be a mentor. And so that would be second level ministry, which is the ministry that Matt is with, would be a good resource for that. And his boss, Mayumi, could hook you up with that.
Okay, this next question, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Is how long, how many days, weeks, or months before your friend returns to Japan should you start trying to connect with them to a church in Japan?
It would depend on the person, but I would say if they have some of them aren't going to have an interest in a church. That's the problem too. I would say the sooner the better, but we can't steamroll it, because some people will be like, oh, I gotta look for a church. Why do I have to look for a church? So yeah, you have to gauge what their interest is too, whether they're just looking for a Bible study or whether they're looking for a church. So it's because to some of them, if they haven't been in a church in Japan, it's like the scariest thing to walk, because they have a phrase in Japanese, and Dennis might correct me, it's the first step into the church is the highest. And it's because it's a foreign culture to them. It's so unlike parts of Japanese culture that it's pretty freaky. You think of your non-Christian friends in America. If you invited them to your church, they'd be like, whoa, what's this? So it's going to be the same thing for a Japanese person, because it's such a subculture. There's so many things in there that aren't very Japanese at all in the Japanese Christian church. The international churches is a whole mishmash of Hawaiian and bilingual, and so but a traditional Japanese church, it's just, the vocabulary is even different. So, and if you learn the vocabulary, it's not so bad, but until you learn the vocabulary, like, what is majiwari, fellowship, what is that? They don't know that. Those terms. Some words are just so specific to the Japanese Christian church. So I mean, it's not bad to start right away, but if you deal with a lot of Japanese, I'd always keep working on your own personal list so that you know what's around. That's why I'm always editing my friends list that I got from her. So.
And that does it for all the questions that I got, unless anyone else has any questions.
37 down in the something there. So, but I don't know if it's any different sending returnees back from Australia. I don't know if it's any different there. I'd be interested to hear any of Dennis's and Ariel's insights on any of this stuff too, because they're kind of my senpai in a couple different areas. So, but what have you seen? Here's my question back to you guys. What have you seen as some of the major difficulties when you send somebody back? Is it the lack of connectedness with somebody to connect them with? Is that the big problem? Or is it just the lack of interest on the returnee side? Or, what have you experienced when you've sent people back?
So, Roberta,
yes,
I'd actually, kind of one thing I've experienced recently was a returnee who became a Christian in the States. He went back to Japan. He got connected to a returnee-friendly church, I think, from that list that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But he went there for a while and then he stopped going. And he said the reason was that, kind of like you were saying, it was so strange to him. It's so foreign. And he was used to hearing about Christianity in English all the time back in the States. He goes to Japan and it's all in Japanese. He was like, this is weird.
Yeah.
And so he just kind of slowly drifted away from that church and ultimately drifted away from the faith, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've heard that before, because the Japanese Bible, a lot of people that study the Bible in English, when they turn around and start reading it in Japanese, if they've first read it in English, then they go to read it in Japanese, it's a challenge. That's why I have about 3 different Japanese Bible translations in my house, and I have Bible software that has about 3 or 4 different Japanese Bible translations, because I think Stephanie was asking on some site the other day about a Bible for children. Well, I wouldn't recommend the standard New Japanese Bible for children, because the language is beautiful language, beautiful Japanese, but a kid would be like, huh? And so the Japanese Living Bible is a simpler English. It's nothing like the American Living Bible. But the Japanese Living Bible and the Gendai are 2 that are good baby steps. But what most traditional churches use is the New Japanese Bible and the New Interconfessional Version. I could give you the Japanese words for that, but it wouldn't make much sense. But the Gendai was done by a Japanese pastor. But they don't have as many versions to choose from, and some of the older, I have Japanese Christian friends that actually prefer some of the older language translations because it's such beautiful Japanese. But when somebody's seeking God and this literature comes at them, it's hard. I mean, because I was raised with the King James version, and so I get it. It's beautiful. But when you're seeking, sometimes it's, so that's why YouVersion is pretty good. There's one weird translation lately on Japanese YouVersion that I don't know where it came from. I've never heard of it, and I used to work at a Japanese publisher. But YouVersion has 5 Japanese versions right now. One of them I'm not really sure about. I think it's the Alive Bible or something. I don't know where that came from. So I don't recommend it because I don't know where it came from. But the other 4 are pretty standard. Actually, the New Japanese Bible is only available on a separate app. And Dora Yamazaki Ransom will get into the one that she's going to talk about, which is very handy to use, has the hiragana above the kanji. But the only way to get the New Japanese Bible on your computer or smartphone is to buy a separate app. And that's because of the way the publisher does it. So I see 42 down there. I'm not looking at it because that's Eric's job. So, yeah, I mean, I'm learning new things about returnees all the time. And, and their desire for community varies. But, when they get, especially for the men need a lot of prayer, because when they get into the company, there's a lot of pressure for them, for Christian men working in the business world. There's a lot of pressure for them to be in the drinking parties and the late hours of work. And so that makes it very hard for them to have any energy on their day off to want to go to church. So, so hopefully online church will help some of that so they can stay in their pajamas and go to church during the pandemic. Maybe they'll go to church more, when things are online. I don't know. So Dennis, great Dennis, any insights, or Ariel? Because I'm looking at YouTube in particular because you've had a lot more experience in some areas than I have had.
Well, I think a lot of the connections when you're trying to connect somebody with people or a church in Japan, a lot of that really almost demands that you have a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. And I think from what I've seen personally, the people that are most effective at connecting their new or even seeker they're new Christians, or even those who would qualify as seekers, who aren't yet saved, who have been coming to Bible studies or whatever. If they're able to connect them with somebody in Japan that will help them along with their either budding or new faith, they have gone to Japan themselves and have struck up friendships, or maybe a lot of the Japanese pastors who pastor here in America, they actually go back regularly, either yearly or every other year, to introduce the people that have come to their church to churches in Japan with pastors who they know personally.
Yeah,
and
that
so,
personal touch.
Yeah, it's that personal touch that seems to make a big difference. The other thing is, don't call up a missionary the day after your friend goes to Japan and say, hey, can you get a hold of them? You know, I have a cousin who used to have people staying with him, and I got a call several days after the person had gone, and I was like, man, it's too late, dude. I hate to say this, but I'll do my best. But man, should have called me before they got on the flight. And
well, you know what some people wanted to do is they wanted to take missions trips right after Christmas. And finally our mission said to them, please do not come work with a missionary the week after Christmas. Everything's shut down and the missionary's trying to recover from Christmas. But they're like, oh, but we're off of school right now. And it's like, yeah, but the missionary needs some rest. But it sometimes, you know, when people email me or email me through the office, sometimes it takes me about a week to get some initial resources to start the conversation. It doesn't happen like that because sometimes I check with the Jcfn staff. Sometimes I can check with the RJC Facebook page. But the RJC Facebook page, this is a disclaimer, and Dennis might not like this, has 3,000 people in it. So it's like buckshot. You know, you're going to get everybody from, you know, and there's not a whole, I wouldn't say the vast majority of people in that Facebook page actually have experience in Japan. There's a lot of people interested in Japan, but they don't know Japan. So they're really, really great people though. But so that's why your mission agencies and individual missionaries, like if you want to find a contact in Nagoya, ask me and I'll ask my contacts. And, you know, so it's, yeah, do the networking. Because but it doesn't happen fast, you know. And sometimes if you can set up nowadays, if you can set up Zoom meetings with a pastor, if you can find a pastor that either has somebody to translate for him if he doesn't speak English, or, you know, we've got the technology now so that we can actually have more conversation before the returnee goes back. But it takes a lot of effort on both sides. It doesn't happen quickly. And that's what's hard when you get someone that's returning right away. Sometimes you don't have a lot of time to put it all together. And so you just, you know, pray and hopefully get it together. Because one of my supporters actually has been trying to connect me with a returnee family that came back with a severely ill child. Well, then the pandemic started. So of course I couldn't go across Tokyo to go see this family in this pediatric hospital, you know. So you got to do it. You got to be very flexible, but use the gifts that we have. We have so much. So
you guys are stealing all my topics. Robert was sharing about like the difference in Japanese and English, their heart language, learning about God, or Dennis thinking about like visiting. So some of you may seen I've been posting deals in the past, like, hey, Sacramento to Japan, $400 round trip, LA to Japan, Seattle to Japan, about $400. Yeah, because it actually does help quite a lot when people go, hey, I'm going to do a 1-week trip and visit a church with you while I'm there. I'm already going to connect with some people there and ask them, hey, can I meet with you? What you said earlier about the baton touch is very important, like face-to-face or even online is.
Well, it's going to have to be online now
because
with the new variety of Corona, they're not letting anybody in here
until February.
Or more.
Yes.
And the Olympics are probably only going to be the athletes. That's going to be it, you know. So, I mean, if I left Japan, I would have no guarantee of getting back in, even though I have a visa. So
So maybe we can do more of these groups where you, like you said, have
I
someone
would
in Japan, and
more of them.
yeah, and I think that helps a lot. There's other groups like BSF Bible Study Fellowship does online
Yeah.
Bible studies.
I'm sure.
Japan.
Thank you for saying that. BSF is huge, not huge, but big in Japan.
Mhm.
They have a men's group, a Monday night men's group. Of course, everything's online now, but they have a Monday night men's group. They have Tuesday night group and Wednesday day group. But my returnee friends that are housewives have trouble with this because they can't do it going out in the evening was good for them, because when they try to do their Bible study at home with the husband and the kids there, it's more difficult for them. Whereas the young people can kind of just do the Zoom or whatever from wherever they are. But yeah, BSF, if you can get someone who if they have enough English ability, get them in an online BSF group before they go back, because those people will become their friends, because you become very close. If you've never done BSF, you become very good friends in your BSF discussion group. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, Ariel. I had forgotten about BSF. And I can share the Excel document that I got from somebody else, because I've edited it so much that it's now it's mine. But I'm still editing a lot of it because pastoral changes and stuff like that, and it's not a perfect science, because it's not like, there's one book though in Japan. If you have a Japanese person working you, it's called the Christian Data Book, which has gone all online. It's the Christian Joho book. It's gone all online, and that lists most every ministry in Japan. But there's no English equivalent for that. So most of the resources that you'll find will be all in Japanese. And if you want to connect a returnee with a returnee group, somebody at RJC said this to me, why doesn't this returnee group have any English on their page? It's for the Japanese. Because I've been trying to get them to put at least one sentence so I can share the events with you guys in America. But, they come back to Japan and everything reverts to Japanese, even though these people are 100% bilingual. Okay.
Rie had a question. Do you mind? She asked, do you find a large percentage of returnees are going to Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, or other big cities that have a fair number of churches, or are they returning to all over Japan?
I would say generally it's all over, but when they start looking for jobs, a lot of the bigger companies will pull them into Tokyo or Osaka. But all over the place, because I mean, our prayer director for this conference, she's from Okinawa, and please go to the prayer time. She's a very good prayer leader. Yeah. But she became a Christian when she was in college in Michigan, I think. But yeah, so they're going all over, but depends on where their job or their husband's job takes them. They might end up in the major cities, the metropolitan areas. And so because actually I just switched churches before the pandemic, because I wanted to be in a church that was actually more intentional about their newcomers. And so that's, for me, that was one of my personal criteria, is a church that's intentional about how they bring, even if it's not a returnee, how they welcome new people in. And so there's quite a few that are quite good about it. I mean, if you look at the back of your brochure, wherever my brochure went, the back of your handbook has some of those ministries listed. Oh, what is this one? What was the resource I just mentioned? What do you mean, Karen? Which one? Bible Study Fellowship?
Oh, is it Bible Study Fellowship or the Japan info, church info?
Oh, church, Christian Data Book.
Yeah.
Nihon Christian Joho Book.
I just put the link to that. I think I am correct.
That might be it. Yeah, that might be it, because I don't know, because it was published by Word of Life Press when it was in book form. So, but it's like a book about that thick. Yeah, I'll write it in kanji, but maybe I'd have to look it up online.
I think she got it right here. It's,
I think she got the link.
Web. Yeah, Christian Data Book.
Yeah, Christian Data Book. But you have to have somebody who can read the Japanese, because I was using it when I worked at CRASHJapan, and it was like huge data to. Yeah, the handout from Jcfn is 66 pages. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, Keith needs the link to the handout. I think it was in the email. It was in one of our thingies. Yep. And so we have a survey to fill out. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, if you want to know resources in Nagoya, I mean, I can do my research and find resources in Nagoya. And one of the ads in the handbook, Grace House, Ken Ishibashi, he's a businessman, and he's actually working on the Nagoya area returnee group. But unfortunately, fortunately, I'm not sure which. A lot of our returnee groups are online right now because Nagoya's had quite a high number of people, and Tokyo, our infrastructure is not doing well with stuff lately. So, yeah. So, but I'm currently in Tokyo Life Church, which is online Facebook Live, and I was talking to one of the pastors in another Jcfn thing recently, or something recently, and I said to him, what do you think about non-Christians or new people joining a church that only has Zoom? And he just shook his head. He's like, no, I don't think somebody who's new would enter into a Zoom group of people they don't know. So that's why your YouTube churches and your Facebook Live churches can get these people initially in the door, you know. But it's because it's hard. It's hard to walk through the door, and it's even harder to walk into a Zoom room, I think. So.
Well, with that, I think we should, and unless there's any more questions, I think we should end the meeting because we got another one coming up here pretty soon. So, yeah. So, yeah. Unfortunately, I think this has to be the end right now. I did post a link in the chat room to a survey regarding this workshop. We would like that if you could fill that out, and we can get some information that way. Otherwise, I think that's it. If there's any other comments, questions you want to?
Yeah, reach out to me anytime, you know, give me a shout. And Liz also is a good returnee ministry person too.
Yep.
So.
And then any of the links that were shared in this chat or in subsequent chats, we'll copy the chat down and put all the links into another document, and then we'll send to you guys. So you don't have to worry if you missed it or something. So just be aware of that. And that's all. So we'll see you all again soon. Go grab a break, and if any of you are staying on for the next workshop, we'll see you in about 25. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.